At my daughter's birthday party, Dad gave my sister's kids envelopes of cash and brand new iPads. But when it was my little girl's turn, he just smirked and said, "She's not really part of the family." I'm Mike, 36 years old. A few years ago, if you'd told me I'd be the one cutting my own parents off financially, I would have laughed and called you overdramatic. Back then, family was my world. I truly believed loyalty and blood were inseparable, that despite any disagreements, my parents would always treat my daughter and me fairly. I was wrong. The incident at my little girl's birthday wasn't a mistake, or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a dagger driven straight into my chest, right in front of everyone. My daughter, Emily, had just turned 7. She's the kindest, most thoughtful child I've ever known. Yes, I'm her dad, so I'm biased, but anyone who meets her says the same. She's the child who draws extra birthday cards for classmates who might feel left out, who saves the biggest cake slice for someone else. Her empathy often surpasses most adults I know. So when my parents arrived at her party, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Maybe they'd finally see how incredible she truly is. The party itself was small. We'd rented a bright little play cafe, adorned with balloons and simple decorations, featuring a butterfly and pastel-themed cake Emily had picked out herself. She was practically vibrating with excitement in her sparkly purple dress she begged me for. I wanted it to be her day, warm, special, and uniquely hers, not some grand spectacle. When my parents walked in, my brother and sister trailing behind, arms laden with gift bags and shiny wrapping paper, I thought perhaps they were finally going to put effort into treating her like they did the other grandkids. I watched as my dad produced crisp, thick white envelopes that I knew weren't just holding cards. One by one, he handed them out to my sister's children, then my brothers. Their faces lit up as they tore them open, revealing stacks of cash and glossy brand new iPads still shrink-wrapped. Cheers and laughter filled the air as packaging ripped. My sister beamed, clapping as if her kids had won the lottery. My brother ruffled his son's hair, boasting, "Now you'll really be the coolest kid in school." Then my dad turned to Emily. He didn't pull out a bag. He didn't offer an envelope. He just smirked, a cruel, dismissive twitch of a smile, and said, "She doesn't count as family." Time froze. Every sound in the room seemed to vanish, replaced by the pounding of my own heart. Emily's little smile faltered. She looked from her grandfather to me, her eyes filled with confusion, her hands twisting together, unable to comprehend why she wasn't treated like the others. My mom looked away, offering no protest, not even a flicker of shame, as if ignoring it would make it disappear. My sister's kids shrieked with delight, powering up their new tablets. My brother's kids waved their cash like a game. And my daughter? She just stood there, her sparkly purple dress suddenly feeling too bright, too loud in the oppressive silence. She whispered, "Dad, did I do something wrong?" That question shattered me. Anger flared, hot and bitter in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Not there. Not in front of her. Instead, I knelt, looked her directly in the eyes, and managed the only truth I could without breaking down. "No, sweetheart. You're perfect. You did nothing wrong." I stood, took her small hand in mine, and without another word, walked out of that party. Past the shocked faces, past my mother's lowered gaze, past my father's smug smirk that told me he believed he'd won whatever twisted game he was playing. Emily's tiny fingers clutched mine as we stepped into the cool air. On the drive home, she sat silently, staring out the window, her untouched cake box resting between us. I replayed my dad's casual dismissal, how he made her feel invisible, less than, and a realization hit me like a freight train. I had been funding their entire lifestyle for years. The house my parents lived in, I paid the mortgage. The SUV my mom drove, in my name. Their credit cards, covered by me. Every time they pleaded hardship, I told myself I was helping family. But what kind of family treats your child like she's nothing? That night, as Emily slept curled up with her stuffed bunny, I sat at the kitchen table. The laptop's glow reflected off my clenched jaw. I systematically pulled up every account, every automatic payment, every lease agreement, and started making calls. No yelling. No shaking. Just a terrifying calm. My parents had shown me exactly what my daughter meant to them. Now it was my turn to show them what they meant to me. The next morning, when the frantic, confused text messages poured in. "Why aren't my cards working? The SUV won't start. The mortgage company called." I didn't answer. I just poured myself coffee, sat back, and thought, maybe now they'll understand what it feels like to be told you don't count. But that was only the beginning. My phone buzzed relentlessly. Dozens of missed calls and texts from my mother. "Mike, something's wrong with the card. Did you change something with the SUV? It won't start. The bank says the mortgage hasn't cleared. What's going on?" I stared at the screen, the rich aroma of coffee filling my kitchen. It felt surreal. For years I had been their silent safety net, their fixer. Every overspending spree, every unpaid loan, every forgotten bill, they leaned on me. I rarely questioned it, believing their promises of just temporary, or until things get better, which always turned into permanent dependency. Now with one swift cut their world had fractured. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead I watched Emily, humming softly as she poured cereal, seemingly oblivious. She was too young to fully grasp yesterday's cruelty, yet I saw its shadow in her hesitant question. Daddy, are Grandma and Grandpa mad at me? My heart tightened. I brushed a strand of hair from her face. No, sweetheart. They're just figuring some things out. But listen, you did nothing wrong. You are the best part of this family. Never forget that. By the time I dropped her off at school, my phone was a war zone. My father had joined the fray, his text short and sharp. Answer me. This isn't funny. You don't get to make decisions like this without consulting us. Consulting us? Like I wasn't the one carrying them financially for years. Like they were in charge and I was still a child under their roof. I silenced my phone and went to work, but the quiet didn't last. By noon my brother called. No pleasantries. What did you do? He snapped, kids yelling in the background, likely squabbling over their new iPads. I don't know what you mean, I said calmly, sipping my coffee. Don't play dumb, Mike, he spat. Mom's crying. Dad's furious. Their cards are getting declined. And the SUV? Did you seriously cancel everything overnight? I paused. I didn't cancel anything that wasn't in my name. He cursed, then lowered his voice. You can't just pull the rug out. They depend on you. We depend on you. Dad's business dried up years ago. Without you, they're drowning. I leaned back. Funny. Yesterday, Dad didn't seem too concerned about who counts as family. Guess now he's realizing how much being part of the family really matters. Silence. Then he barked. Don't drag your kid into this. This is between you and them. I laughed humorlessly. That's exactly the point. He dragged her into it. He made her feel like she didn't belong, like she wasn't family. And you all sat there and let it happen. So now you deal with the fallout. He tried to argue, but I hung up. That afternoon my mom showed up at my house. I saw her through the window, wringing her hands on the porch like the victim in all this. When I opened the door, she tried to brush past me, but I blocked her. Mike, she said breathlessly, you can't just do this. Your father is humiliated. We tried to get groceries and the card declined at checkout. Do you know how embarrassing that was? Not nearly as embarrassing as telling a 7-year-old she doesn't count as family, I shot back. She flinched but didn't apologize. Instead, she pivoted. He didn't mean it that way. You know how your father is. He speaks without thinking. He was just joking. A joke. I repeated, my voice flat. You really think that was a joke? She pressed her lips together, then sighed dramatically. Mike, you've always been so sensitive. We've always done what we could for you. Now that you're successful, it's your turn to support the family. That's how it works. Your father provided for you, and now you provide for us. That stung, not because it was true. My dad had scraped by, cut corners, and leaned on me the moment I started earning, but because it was the narrative they'd fed me my whole life. They'd built this story that I owed them, that every check I wrote, every payment I covered, was some kind of debt repayment for being born. I stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind me so Emily wouldn't overhear. Mom, listen carefully. I'm not sensitive. I'm a father protecting my daughter. And if you think I'm going to let her grow up believing she's less than her cousins because of you, you're wrong. Yesterday was the line. Dad crossed it and you let him. I'm done. Her eyes welled up, but these weren't tears of guilt. They were manipulative, the same kind she used to tug at my sympathy. Mike, if you cut us off, we'll lose everything. The house, the car. What will people think? Do you want that on your conscience? I almost laughed again. Funny how you worry about what people think, but not what your granddaughter feels. That tells me everything I need to know. She sputtered, tried to say more, but I walked back inside and gently closed the door. For the first time in years, a strange calm settled over me. But the calm didn't last. The family group chat exploded that evening. My sister demanded to know how I could ruin Mom and Dad's lives. My brother insisted I was overreacting. My dad finally chimed in with a cold, clipped line. You've embarrassed this family enough. Fix what you broke. Fix what I broke? As if the brokenness hadn't been there long before I cut off the money. Then came the kicker. My sister sent a photo to the group. Her kids holding up their iPads, smiling wide, captioned, "At least some of us appreciate what Dad does for us. Too bad your daughter couldn't handle being left out for once." My hands tightened around my phone. Emily was nearby, drawing quietly, unaware of the digital war. I looked at her, so innocent, so undeserving of this cruelty. I knew this was far from over. They weren't just entitled, they were escalating. If I thought walking away from the party was the end, I was wrong. This was only the beginning. The following days were a blur of tension and thinly veiled hostility. I'd expected anger from my father, guilt trips from my mother, and constant pestering from my siblings. What I didn't expect was how far they would go to prove a point. By the end of that week, I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about control. About them reminding me that no matter my age or accomplishments, I was still expected to play the role they assigned me. The provider, the fixer, the one who sacrificed while they indulged. Initially, their retaliation was subtle but deliberate. My sister posted passive-aggressive photos on social media. Her kids playing with their new iPads, all smiles with captions like, "Family is everything, love." The irony was sickening. My brother echoed similar sentiments in the group chat, hinting I was unstable or losing touch because I dared to step back. They weren't directly confronting me anymore. They were trying to paint me as the problem, the black sheep. But the real turning point came the following weekend. Emily had a recital at school. She'd practiced for weeks, every evening, plucking her little violin with a determined frown that always melted into a proud grin when she got a piece right. I promised her I'd be there, front row, cheering her on. For her, this was the event of the season. When we arrived, the auditorium buzzed with parents, siblings, and grandparents. Emily clutched her violin case like fragile glass, bouncing nervously. I spotted my parents across the room with my brothers' and sisters' families. I hadn't expected them. After everything, I thought pride would keep them away. But no, they were there, loud as ever, laughing and greeting other parents as if nothing had happened. For a fleeting moment, I hoped they'd come to support Emily, that they'd finally realize their mistake and wanted to make amends. That naive hope quickly vanished. When Emily's group took the stage, I watched her scan the crowd. Her shoulders relaxed when she spotted me, and she gave a tiny wave. I waved back, my chest swelling with pride. But then her eyes drifted to the other side of the auditorium, toward my parents, sister, and brother. That's when it happened. My dad leaned over to my sister, whispered something, and suddenly they all started laughing. Not a natural, joyful laugh, but sharp, deliberate, cruel. As Emily lifted her bow, my father cupped his hands around his mouth and said, loud enough for nearby rows to hear, "Hope she doesn't squeak like last time." The words sliced through the auditorium's quiet like a knife. A few parents glanced around, frowning, but my family just smirked, pretending it was harmless fun. My daughter froze. Her small hands trembled on the bow, and I saw panic flood her face. She squeaked. Not once, not twice, but the whole way through. Every note fractured. Every rhythm fell apart. She tried to keep going, but tears welled in her eyes, and by the end her chin quivered. The applause came anyway, scattered and hesitant, because everyone had heard the remark, everyone had seen her crumble. I wanted to storm across that auditorium, grab my father and drag him out. But I didn't. Not then. I forced myself to stay seated because Emily needed to see me calm. She needed to know I wasn't shaken, even if I was burning inside. After the recital, she walked off stage, her violin dangling limply. She didn't run into my arms as usual. Instead, she whispered, "Daddy, why did Grandpa say that? Why would he laugh at me?" I crouched down, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Because some people don't know how to be kind, sweetheart. But you were brave up there, and that's what matters." Behind us, I heard my family gathering their things, laughing as if they hadn't just humiliated a child. My sister's voice cut through the crowd. "Well, I guess she's not going to Juilliard anytime soon." More laughter. My mom didn't stop them. She didn't even look ashamed. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I had tolerated years of manipulation, years of being an ATM, years of dismissal. But now it wasn't just me. They had intentionally targeted Emily, in public, and broken something pure inside her. It wasn't favoritism anymore. It wasn't passive neglect. It was deliberate, targeted cruelty. On the ride home, Emily sat silently, her violin untouched. Normally, she'd chatter about her performance, laughing about mistakes, asking if I thought she did well. But that night, she just stared out the window, her reflection pale against the dark glass. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. My mind raced, replaying every insult, every demand, every time they treated my daughter as less. I realized with absolute clarity that cutting them off financially was too easy. They'd find ways around it. No, I needed to take back something bigger, something they'd never expect. Before I could even formulate a plan, the betrayal deepened. The next morning, I learned my father had spoken to Emily's teacher. He'd innocently pulled her aside after the recital, claiming Emily was sensitive, and not really cut out for music, suggesting she be placed in less demanding activities. The teacher, bless her, called me directly, finding it strange and inappropriate. She reassured me she wouldn't take his words seriously, but hearing it made me sick. He wasn't just humiliating her publicly. He was trying to sabotage her privately. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He just shrugged over the phone. Better she learns now than wastes everyone's time later. That was it. That was the emotional breaking point from which I couldn't come back. I looked at my daughter that night, curled up in bed, her violin case tucked under the covers like she was trying to protect it. I made a silent promise. Whatever it took, however long it took, they would never hurt her like this again. And when I was done, they would regret ever thinking she didn't count. After the recital and that call from Emily's teacher, something inside me shifted profoundly. Up until then, I'd been furious, but a thread of disbelief persisted. I kept thinking they might come to their senses, apologize, or just not realize the damage they were causing. But my father's deliberate attempt to sabotage Emily's music crushed that fragile hope of reconciliation. I barely slept that week, nights stretching into hours of replaying Emily's face at her birthday, the tears in her eyes on stage, my father's smug smirk. Each memory cut deeper, not for me but for my daughter. I started noticing changes in her too. She was quieter, less bubbly. Her violin sat untouched for days. When I gently asked if she wanted to practice, she shook her head, murmuring, "Maybe later." Later never came. It broke me to see her light dim. Emily had always been this vibrant, glowing presence. Her laughter filled rooms. Her imagination turned an empty living room into a castle. Now it was like someone had poured water over that flame, leaving only smoke. I knew exactly who struck the match. At work, my mind wandered, staring blankly at my screen. Coworkers probably thought I was just tired. The truth was I was unraveling. I'd spent years bending over backward, convinced it was what good sons did. In return, they treated the most important person in my life as disposable. It was more than cruel. It was a betrayal of everything family was supposed to mean. The texts never stopped. My father alternated between icy silence and harsh demands. "Restore the payments. Enough games. You'll regret this if you don't fix it." My mother leaned on guilt, sending long messages about how family isn't perfect, we all make mistakes. Never mentioning the recital or the teacher, always framing me as the one overreacting, tearing the family apart. My sister and brother chimed in. "You're embarrassing everyone. Don't make your daughter the center of your tantrums. Think about mom and dad's reputation." I didn't reply to any of them. Their voices, however, echoed in my head when the house grew quiet at night. I'd paced the kitchen, glass of water in hand, wondering how I'd gotten here. How had I allowed myself to become so entangled, so obligated, that cutting them off felt like sawing off a limb? How had I spent years financing people who couldn't even muster the decency to clap for my daughter? It was in those restless nights that the grief hit hardest, grief for the parents I thought I had, the family I believed existed. I realized I'd been clinging to an illusion, a childhood belief that if I just gave enough, they'd love me in return. But they didn't. Not me, and certainly not Emily. The hardest moment came one evening when Emily padded into the living room, dragging her violin, too heavy for her. She plopped onto the couch next to me, resting her head against my arm. "Daddy," she whispered, "do you think I should stop playing?" My throat tightened. "Why would you say that?" She shrugged. "Grandpa said I'm not good, and I don't want to mess up again." Everyone laughed. I pulled her into my arms, holding her so tight she squirmed. "Sweetheart, listen to me. You are good. You're better than good. You're brave. You went up on that stage and you played even when you were scared. That's what makes you amazing. Not whether every note was perfect." She was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "But what if I'm not family enough?" That nearly shattered me. I pressed my forehead against hers. "You are my family. You're my whole world. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." When she fell asleep in my arms, I carried her to bed and sat by her side for a long time. That's when the planning began. Not in a dramatic flash of inspiration, but in small, deliberate thoughts that built slowly. I couldn't just cut them off and hope they'd fade away. They were too entitled, too stubborn. They'd claw their way back into our lives, finding new ways to hurt her. No, I needed to ensure Emily and I were untouchable. That meant reevaluating everything, my finances, my will, my home. It meant drawing lines so deep in the sand they couldn't be crossed. I started quietly. I met with a lawyer under the pretense of updating routine paperwork, but my real goal was to set protections in place. I asked about trusts, guardianship, how to secure Emily's future where my family couldn't reach it. I didn't tell anyone, not even close friends, knowing if word got out my family would twist it into more ammunition. I also started pulling back socially. I stopped going to extended family dinners, stopped answering calls, stopped showing up at events I'd normally feel obligated to attend. The excuses were easy. Work's busy. Emily has school. We've got other plans. It didn't take long for whispers to start. My sister posted online about some people thinking they're too good for their own family, clearly aimed at me. My brother dropped hints in the group chat about me isolating Emily. My mom even sent a long dramatic message to everyone, claiming I was turning my child against her grandparents. The irony was almost laughable. They had done that all by themselves. But isolation has a cost. As I pulled away, loneliness crept in. Nights felt heavier, quieter. Even with Emily's laughter filling the house, I felt the absence of something I used to think was permanent. It's a strange pain mourning people who are still alive. Still, beneath the grief, something steady was growing, resolve. I couldn't change who they were. I couldn't make them see Emily's worth. But I could ensure she grew up never doubting it herself. And I could make sure my family learned that actions have consequences they couldn't buy their way out of with cash-stuffed envelopes or shiny new gadgets. By the time the month turned over, their calls had grown more desperate. My father even showed up at my office one afternoon, waiting outside the building like a storm cloud. I slipped out the back before he could corner me. I wasn't ready yet. Not for the confrontation, not for the explosion I knew was coming, but deep down I felt it building. I was nearing a breaking point. And when it came, there'd be no going back. When you hit rock bottom, you either stay there and let the weight crush you, or you find something inside you didn't know was there and start climbing. For a while, I didn't know which I'd be. I'd wake up, make Emily breakfast, take her to school. My parents weren't the type to slink away quietly. They thrived on control, appearances, and other people's money. Without me funding their lives, they were cornered animals, and cornered animals lash out. It was during this uneasy calm that something unexpected fell into my lap. One afternoon, my business partner forwarded me an email from a regional bank we sometimes dealt with. Routine financial statements, but attached at the bottom I saw a familiar name, my father. Apparently, he'd applied for a line of credit and listed me as a guarantor. Without my consent. I stared in disbelief. My name, address, even my business were listed. He had forged my information. My blood ran cold as I scrolled through the details. Not only had he tried to leverage my financial credibility, but he'd grossly exaggerated his own assets, claiming ownership of things I knew he no longer possessed. For years I'd quietly bailed them out of messes like this, writing checks, smoothing things over. But this time I wasn't bailing them out. This time I saved the email, forwarded it to my lawyer, and began a different kind of planning. When I met with my lawyer later that week, he whistled low. "Mike, this isn't just desperate. This is fraud. If the bank pushes, your father could be in very real legal trouble." I leaned back. "Good." He looked at me over his glasses. "You're not planning to bail him out?" "No," I said firmly. "Not this time. Not ever again." We sat in silence. "Do you want to pursue this?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to throw it in his face, watch him squirm. But another part wanted patience. I had leverage now, and leverage is worth more when it ripens. That was the seed of my plan. Over the next few weeks, I started pulling threads quietly, carefully. I spoke with contacts in the business community, the same ones I'd been shaking hands with at dinners and charity events. It turned out my father's name had come up before. He had a reputation. Someone who once had money but was notorious for bad debts and borrowing connections. The more I listened, the clearer the picture became. He wasn't just struggling financially. He was on the brink of losing everything. And my mother? I learned she'd been bragging in her book club for years about her generous son, painting me as their lifelong safety net. Some women from that group quietly reached out, one even apologizing. "We always thought you didn't mind the way she told it." That infuriated me, but it also gave me more fuel. I wasn't going to let their narrative stand unchallenged forever. Then there was my brother. He'd gotten into real estate investments a few years back, riding the market while it was hot. Now, with the downturn, he was drowning in debt. Rumor had it he was behind on multiple mortgages. My sister wasn't any better. Her boutique mom business, selling overpriced candles and home decor, had flopped spectacularly. She was living off credit cards and her husband's paycheck. One by one, the pillars of their entitlement were crumbling. And here I was, in the strongest position of my life. At home, I started preparing Emily too. Not directly, but with small lessons. I'd teach her about saving, about needs versus wants, about surrounding yourself with people who lift you up. I never mentioned her grandparents directly, but I saw her eyes sharpen. She understood more than I gave her credit for. The turning point came when I was invited to a local gala, a charity fundraiser for children's arts programs, fitting given Emily's love for music. I decided to attend, partly to show support, partly to build connections. That night, surrounded by business leaders in the ballroom, I realized how far I'd come. I wasn't the quiet son in his parents' shadow anymore. I was a man who could stand on his own, command respect, and build a future without anyone's permission. And then fate handed me another weapon. At the gala, I bumped into an old acquaintance in municipal planning. We chatted casually, and he mentioned almost in passing a new development project being reviewed, one that just so happened to border the neighborhood where my parents lived. He joked about how property taxes there were about to skyrocket if the project went through. That nugget stuck with me. My parents were already struggling. If taxes rose significantly, they'd be in deeper trouble. And I had the resources not only to weather it but to benefit from it. If I positioned myself right, I could end up owning property in that very area, maybe even theirs, without lifting a finger to take it. The market would do it for me. For weeks I played it cool. I gathered documents, kept the fraudulent bank application tucked away, built contacts, and expanded Emily's trust. Every move was quiet, deliberate, surgical. My family had no idea how far ahead I was setting the chessboard. They still thought they could bully me back into submission with guilt and insults. They had no clue I was about to turn the board upside down. It was around this time that my mother tried a new tactic. She showed up at Emily's school unannounced. The front office called telling me Grandma had stopped by with cookies. When I arrived, my mom was in the lobby, beaming as if we were in a happy reunion. Emily, on the other hand, stood stiffly beside her, uncomfortable. "Mike," my mom said brightly, "I thought I'd surprise Emmy." I took Emily's hand and looked my mother dead in the eye. "Don't ever come here unannounced again." Her smile faltered. "Oh, don't be dramatic. I'm her grandmother. I have every right to see her." "No," I said flatly. "You don't. Not anymore." The silence was thick. Emily squeezed my hand, and for the first time, I saw her look at her grandmother, not with confusion or longing, but with quiet resolve. That was the moment I knew I wasn't just protecting her anymore. I was teaching her how to protect herself. While my family thought they were still playing the same old game, I was already 3 moves ahead. Because soon, very soon, I was going to use everything I'd learned, the forged documents, their financial instability, the community connections, and even the rising property taxes, to make sure they understood exactly what it meant when I said Emily and I didn't count on them anymore. They always said things have a way of coming back around. They just never meant it would hit them. For months, I'd laid the groundwork. Legal locks around Emily's future, quiet conversations with people who owed me favors, learning the slow language of municipal politics, and collecting proof. The forged bank document was the first domino. Once I handed that file to my lawyer, the bank's fraud department did what banks do with a smoking gun. They opened a formal investigation, froze the questionable applications, and started asking very uncomfortable questions. My father called me a coward for not fixing it, as if I owed him the privilege of bailing him out of his own lies. I didn't answer. But legal trouble is only half the equation. The other half was leverage, which I cultivated piece by patient piece. There were the property rumors I'd quietly confirmed at the gala, the development that would upend the neighborhood, the likely tax reassessments, and the names of contractors and purchasing agents who would move first. There was the quiet account of my brother's failed investments, his mortgages fragile enough that one sudden tax spike would collapse them like a house of cards. I didn't start the market forces. I simply positioned myself so that when the market moved, I could steer the consequences in ways that exposed more than just balances and ledgers. Early on a Tuesday, the dominoes started to fall. It began small, ordinary. My sister's social feed lit up with the usual smiling family photos. Only this time, one photo had an unexpected caption. A mutual friend from the school committee, someone who'd heard my story from the fundraiser circuit, reposted an old picture of my parents with the line, "Funny how some families demand gratitude while treating others like dirt." The comment thread filled with questions. People I'd met at work, neighbors, even a few women from my mother's book club who'd privately sent me apologies. Suddenly, they were public. My sister reacted the way entitled people do, defensively with outrage and conspiracy theories. But outrage doesn't explain away screenshots or bank records when they're laid out in order. Then came the bank. They called my father in for questioning about the forged guarantee. Their inquiries weren't secret. The bank's legal team made sure there was a paper trail. For the first time since I'd been paying the mortgage and the SUV lease, he had to sit across from strangers and explain why I was listed as a guarantor on loans he had no right to attach my name to. He fumbled. He lied. When the bank threatened to refer the case to the district attorney, his voice went small. Few things are more humiliating to someone who built a life around machismo than realizing it's not bluster that protects you. It's paper, signatures, and truth. At the same time, my brother's lender called him about an accelerating default. A tax reassessment, followed by a home insurance reevaluation, had pushed his payments into arrears. His pride had kept him from asking me for help. He'd always loved the drama of outspending his means. But pride can't pay a mortgage when the math changes overnight. He sold his nicer car in a panic and started floating messages about tough times on social media, the kind of thinly veiled pleas that used to come straight to my phone with begging eyes and, just until next month. Not this time. And then the most delicious little stroke of all, the SUV. I had canceled the lease months ago and put the car back into a holding account, ensuring every return notice was legally spotless. No grounds for complaint. Late one afternoon, I got a forwarded text from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. A photo of the SUV being towed away from a grocery store parking lot. My mother's face red and furious in the reflection of the rear window, the tow operator looking bored and professional. The caption read, "When you spin like it's 2010 but live like it's 1995. The image traveled faster than any family group chat argument ever had. I didn't dance on graves. I'm not some cartoon villain. But there was a small private warmth to watching the consequences of their choices land where they belonged. For years they had weaponized shame against me. Used the idea of what people will think to keep me paying, to keep me quiet, to keep my daughter in her place. Now the public questions and the very visible unpaid balances were the things keeping them up at night. I'd move them out from behind their closed doors and into the light, where their behavior couldn't be smoothed over by excuse or manipulation. Still, I kept my moves surgical. When the bank's investigator called to ask if I wanted to file a criminal complaint for identity fraud, my lawyer and I discussed it like two chess players analyzing lines. It would take months, possibly longer, shred their credit, cascading into forced sales and bankruptcies. It would humiliate them in court. It would also inevitably drag Emily into public family turmoil. I thought about that, then I thought about the recital, the birthday party, the way my father had smiled as if he were in the right. And I made the decision. We filed. That evening, the district attorney's office sent a letter acknowledging receipt of the complaint and requesting cooperation in their preliminary inquiry. The letter arrived in a plain white envelope, but its effect on our lives was anything but plain. My mother called in a panic, voice high and accusing. "This is a witch hunt," she shrieked. "You're going to ruin us." My brother texted a string of capital letters and exclamation points. My sister resorted to passive-aggressive posts about how families should stick together. Each response only tightened my resolve. I'd expected a backlash, the family chant of "How could you?" The attempts to shame me into rolling everything back. But I hadn't expected the community to tilt. PDA emails started including awkward silences when my mother tried to book the bake sale table. Invitations stopped arriving. People in our neighborhood, the same ones who used to chuckle and nod at their generosity, began to edge away. That hurt them more than being denied cash. They were social animals and social standing was their oxygen. While the legal process unfolded, I executed another layer of the plan. I used my LLC to buy a small parcel of property 2 streets over from my parents' house, a vacant lot that the development I'd heard about would soon make valuable. I didn't buy it to gloat. I bought it because in a few months when rezoning and taxes took their course, I wanted to be in a position to make a fair market offer that the bank or an auctioneer would accept. In a worst-case scenario, I could be the purchaser at a trustee's sale. Owning the lot would be a move in the same game they tried to play with me. Only I was playing by the rules and brilliantly. There were procedural satisfactions along the way. Formal letters from lawyers, terse phone calls from people I'd once done favors for politely declining further contact, the quiet snubbing of my parents at community events. But the thing that put the most salt in the wound wasn't the legal paperwork or the auctions or the repossessions. It was the shift in the way Emily held herself. She watched as this house of cards shook and fell around them. And instead of crumbling again, like she had at the recital, she stood straighter. She asked me questions, fewer about revenge, more about fairness and strength. "Why do people treat some kids differently?" she'd ask over cereal. "Because sometimes people are small inside," I'd tell her. "And when they're small, they try to make others feel small too. But you're not small, Em. You never were." She'd smile, and the light in her eyes came back in flashes that warmed something in me that had been raw for a long time. Then the final piece fell into place, the one I'd been building toward without telling anyone. The bank, unsettled by the fraud and nervous about potential liability, chose to foreclose on the smallest of the outstanding properties tied to my father's name. It wasn't the house he'd always boasted about. It was a rental he'd used as collateral on a line of credit. The auction notice went out publicly, posted in the legal section of the paper, and my legal team confirmed the date. I could have let it go to auction and stood back watching them scramble. I could have let the market take them and quietly purchased the property later. But there's an art to vengeance. Timing, theater, precision. and the thought of simply being the anonymous buyer felt anticlimactic. What I wanted was for them to understand finally and fully the cost of their choices. I wanted a moment where they looked up from the rubble of their lives and saw me standing there, calm, composed, and unbothered. I wanted the look on my father's face when he realized his prying hands had been swapped for a closed door. So I arranged a small thing. I told my lawyer I wanted to be present at the auction under an assumed company name. I had the cashier's check ready, the LLC paperwork prepared to transfer the deed. I told Emily only that we were going to see how auctions work. No fanfare, no talk of revenge, only a quiet lesson in markets and consequences. On the morning of the sale, I woke earlier than usual. The air had that clean electric quality of a day when something irreversible is about to happen. I tucked Emily's hand into mine and drove past our old neighborhood toward the municipal building where trustee sales were held. People milled around, mostly strangers, some curious neighbors. My parents weren't there yet. They'd been scrambling, calling every relative in hopes someone would bail them out at the last minute. Pride can make you slow to act, and shame can make you slow to ask. I checked my phone. A message from my sister. "Where are you?" A string of frantic posts from my mother. Pleading, begging, promises to change had started sprinkling across social media. The kind of desperate performance they thought would sway me. It wouldn't. I felt a small private compassion for them. They were panicking in the only language they knew. Inside the room, bids began. The auctioneer called the numbers in that sing-song cadence that makes property feel like a commodity rather than a home. I held the bid card with an odd detachment, like someone watching a stage performance from the back row. The prices climbed. People shuffled pieces of paper. My heart beat steady. When the property was finally within reach, I raised my card just once. The gavel came down. The murmurs in the room shifted. I signed the paperwork. We transferred funds. It took mere minutes, dry and administrative, to make the purchase legally binding. But I knew what the ripple would look like. Statements to the credit bureaus, liens recorded, the bank's exposure finally visible on paper. I had done this with surgical calm. Then came the call I'd been waiting for. My father's voice on the line was thin and cracked. "Mike," he said, as if addressing a stranger. "Please, we can fix this." "We can't." He couldn't finish. I listened, the corner of my mouth lifting in a way that felt unfamiliar and righteous. "I already fixed it," I said softly. "I bought the property today." I heard silence, then the sputter of disbelief. "You can avoid a lot of pain if you leave Emily out of your life. Walk away. Let us be." The thermostat of my conscience clicked. The words were blunt, but they were the truth. He begged. I stayed calm. I offered one last quiet olive branch. If they participated in family counseling and made a public apology acknowledging what they'd done, I would consider unwinding some of the more public actions with counsel. It was a conditional apology, yes, protection always is, but it was real leverage tied to real consequences. He said no. So I let the motion continue. As we drove back, Emily chattered about how auctions were kind of like a game, and I told her that sometimes people play hard and unfair, and sometimes you have to be willing to play better. The sun was bright, the car hummed, and a small unbidden thought crossed my mind. This was working. The plan was unfolding the way I had constructed it in the quiet hours. The legal complaints, the targeted purchases, the strategy of letting the market do half the work while my actions did the other half. We pulled into the driveway and my phone buzzed. It was my sister. A short message. "You're going to regret this." I read it, then looked down at Emily, who had fallen asleep against the window, violin case snug beside her like a sleeping animal. I was about to press send on a final email to my lawyer, one that would initiate the next phase, the public notice and the transfer of title, when my hand hesitated. There was another call buzzing. My father again, and beyond him, the slow, cooling voice of our town gossiping in the background on social media. I thought of the recital of the birthday party, of my daughter's small, confused face asking why she wasn't enough. I opened the draft email, read the last clause I'd written, one that spelled out the terms of their last chance, and then stopped. I realized I was moments away from pulling a trigger that would change everything. Not just their lives, but our lives in a way that might be irreversible. I set the phone down. The sun fell across Emily's face. I thought of forgiveness, of silence, of the kind of person I wanted to be when all of it was done. Then I thought of my daughter's violin under the blanket, of the way she'd found the courage to pick it up again. And I tightened my jaw. I had sent the email. The rest had to be handled in person. I booked a meeting with them at the community center under the pretense of wanting to talk things through. I told no one the truth about what I'd bought that morning. I wanted their reactions to be genuine, not manufactured by knowledge. When the three of them walked into the fluorescent-lit room that afternoon, My mother clutching a tissue box like it was proof of performance, my father looking oddly smaller, my sister glaring like someone used to being obeyed. I felt the weight of the moment settle like a held breath. I stood and for the first time in years, I looked at them as if they were strangers. Before we start, I said, reaching into my bag, there's something you need to know. Then I showed them the deed. The look on their faces when I laid the deed on the table was worth more than every dollar I'd spent, more than every sleepless night, more than every bitter text I'd ignored. My father's jaw went slack. My mother's tissue froze halfway to her cheek. And my sister actually laughed at first, until she saw the seal on the document. You're lying, my father said finally, his voice low and shaky, like an old dog trying to bare its teeth one last time. I slid the paper toward them. It's public record. You can look it up yourself. My sister snatched it, eyes darting across the lines, her face drained. No, this can't be right. You wouldn't do this to us. I didn't do this to you, I said evenly. You did it to yourselves. I just stopped protecting you from the consequences. My mother let out a wailing sound, half anger, half grief. We're your family, Mike. How could you humiliate us like this after everything we've done for you? I laughed then, quietly shaking my head. Everything you've done for me? Like telling my daughter she doesn't count as family? Like laughing while she cried on stage? Like sabotaging her with her teacher? If that's what family is, I'd rather have none. My father tried to rally, pounding the table. You owe us respect, he barked. I met his glare and didn't flinch. Respect isn't owed. It's earned. And you lost mine the second you decided my child was disposable. The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time in my life, they had nothing to throw back. No threats, no guilt trips, no manipulative speeches. Just the crushing weight of their own ruin. My sister snapped first, slamming her hands on the table. You'll regret this. When people find out what you did, they already know, I cut in. You've made sure of that with your own behavior. People aren't blind. They've seen the way you treat Emily, the way you twist every story. The only thing I've done is stop covering for you. Her face twisted, but no words came out. I stood, slipping the deed back into my folder. Here's how this goes. You stay away from me. You stay away from my daughter. If you can't manage that, the next papers you'll see won't be property deeds. They'll be subpoenas. Consider this your last warning. My father's eyes, once full of fire, now looked small, beaten. He muttered something under his breath, but I didn't care to hear it. I turned to leave, Emily's future tucked safely under my arm. As I walked out, my mother called after me, her voice breaking. You'll regret turning your back on us. I stopped in the doorway, looked back once, and said the only truth that mattered. No, I regret not doing it sooner. Then I left them there in the stale light of that community center, with nothing but the echo of their own failure. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread like cracks through glass. The bank pressed charges, their reputation collapsed, and the community that once excused their arrogance turned cold. My brother sold off what little he had left. My sister's business dissolved. And my parents' house, over-leveraged and drowning under back taxes, eventually went up for sale. I didn't buy it. I didn't need to. They had already lost the only thing that mattered, control. Meanwhile, Emily thrived. She picked up her violin again, slowly at first, then with her old joy. At her next recital, she played with confidence, her bow steady, her chin lifted. When the applause came, she looked out into the audience and found me smiling back at her. Not my parents, not my siblings, just me. And that was enough. Afterward, she ran into my arms, breathless and beaming. Did you hear, Daddy? I didn't squeak this time. I hugged her tight, the sound of her laughter filling every empty place my family had left behind. I heard, sweetheart. You were perfect. And in that moment, I realized something. Revenge hadn't just been about tearing them down. It had been about building us up. Me and her together, free from their shadows. They had tried to make her feel like she didn't count. Now the world was proving otherwise. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she whispered, Daddy, we don't need them, do we? I kissed her forehead. No, Emily, we never did. With that, the chapter closed, not with shouting or chaos, but with quiet triumph. They had lost everything they thought made them powerful, and we had gained everything they could never touch. The final line, the one that stayed with me, wasn't something I said out loud. It was something I felt deep in my chest as I watched my daughter drift to sleep, safe and loved. In the end, they were right about one thing. Family is everything. They just never realized mine started and ended with her.